Hello, my friends. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to take a few moments to share something personal with you all. You may have noticed that I've been a bit quiet in this space over the past few months. Haven't been releasing new podcast episodes or hosting new interviews. And I wanted you, my loyal listeners who have been here with me and infusing this community with your wisdom and love. I wanted you to know why. The conversation that you're about to hear was actually recorded a little over a year ago. And I have several beautiful interviews from last year that I'm really excited to finally share with you. But as those conversations were being recorded, there was something much bigger happening in the background of my personal life that I haven't spoken to much in this space. And that is that my soul cat, my animal companion, who I had spent my whole life with, essentially, Miss Kitty, was nearing the end of her life. Miss Kitty was my companion, my best friend, my soulmate for 19 and a half years. And during the last 18 months of her life, she was living with cancer and kidney failure. I had made the decision to focus on palliative care, keeping her comfortable and happy and loved. And while our vet prepared us that, we may only have a very short amount of time with her, we weren't sure if that would be weeks or months. We ended up being gifted an additional year and a half with her. And that time was so sacred and so beautiful. And much of my life, when I wasn't working, involved just being present with her. We edited podcast episodes together. She was on my lap as I recorded and edited and thought through the descriptions and uh, poured through the records of people applying to see who would be a good fit. She was really by my side from start to finish with each episode of the podcast. But more than anything, we spent a lot of time cuddling and resting and just enjoying each other's company. I had a knee injury last summer that really took me out and removed me from a lot of the outdoor activities and gardening and all of the adventuring I like to do. And I'm so grateful now in hindsight that I was kind of grounded and um, spent more time at home because I didn't know that would be my last summer with Miss Kitty. Even though the vet again tried to prepare me, I was still kind of magically believing that she may find a way to live forever, or at least for many more years, in spite of her chronic illness. And she did defy science to some degree with her extra 18 months. But that's what was happening in 2024, late 2024 and 2025, as I continue to record podcast episodes and continue to um, show up for my coaching work and my business and my work in the corporate realm. My open time was hers. I loved having that dedicated time with her that I knew was precious and that I knew was a gift. And I'm so grateful for her because she's the one who carried me through my hardest seasons of life. She was my constant, my safe place, and one of my greatest teachers in unconditional love. She also taught me a lot about drawing boundaries. She was sassy and she would let people know when she did or didn't want love. She was vocal. She asked for what she needed. She was a force. And on March 17th of this year, 2026, Miss Kitty peacefully passed away, held by myself and my husband. And I've missed her every single day since then. This is harder to record than I anticipated, so bear with me. Um, so while my life has continued to move forward since then, as it does, and there have been so many beautiful blessings since her passing, including several little kittens. That's another story for another day. But several kittens have found their way into our lives in the months since she passed. And whether that's the cat distribution system at its best or Miss Kitty sending a little extra love my way, I might never know, but I like to believe that it's her. And those kittens have been very healing and brought a lot of joy into the house that was missing after Miss Kitty passed. But anyways, returning to this podcast was much harder than I expected it to be. I realized it was avoiding coming back to the space and that I couldn't think of a single episode that I had ever edited without Miss Kitty curled up in my lap. Like I said, she was there part of the whole process even before we knew that she was sick, but especially in that year and a half of presence after I knew she was sick. The space just became really intertwined with our special time, our cuddles, and she was the best little podcast assistant I could have ever asked for. And I realized that opening these files again and editing these episodes and returning to this space meant really facing the reality that she's not physically here anymore. If you haven't picked this up from my presence in the podcast, I am a person that loves very deeply. And because I love very deeply, I also grieve very deeply, and that's not an emotion I'm willing to try to bypass. I think there's so much wisdom in all of our emotions, but especially in grief. It's a very sacred experience. So I have given myself permission to be quiet and to step back from several things with the podcast and my business and to focus on healing. Um, but I've known I wanted to return because this space means so much to me, this podcast and all of you. So as I sat down to edit this episode, it was really like crossing a threshold, and it felt right because this conversation that you're about to listen to is about healing and authenticity. It's about finding safety within ourselves and coming home to who we really are, the essence of our souls. And those are the exact things that Miss Kitty helped me do throughout her life. She was such a big presence on my healing journey, and I am endlessly grateful that she was with me as I grew, learned, healed. But I'm also so grateful that she got to experience the aftermath of what was a really long and hard journey. And she got to have a beautiful, peaceful chapter with me and my husband where safety and security was the norm, and love was the norm, and peace was the norm. And that is a gift that I will never, never stop being grateful for. So, with that, today's episode is dedicated to Miss Kitty and to the love that she gave so freely and so generously, to the quiet wisdom that she carried, and to all the ways that she continues to walk beside me, even though her presence is no longer physical. Thank you for being here, for listening, for your patience during this season of pause, for showing up again to listen to this episode, for giving me the space to grieve and to be quiet, and then to still be with me when I was ready to return. I so appreciate everybody who listens to the podcast or connects with me on any of the other spaces that I'm in. Thank you. And thank you for being part of this. I'm really glad you're here, and I am really excited to begin sharing these really meaningful conversations with you again. With that, here's today's episode.
Welcome to Internally Guided Life, a podcast to help you unlock a life of balance, fulfillment, and joy. I'm Kayla Sweet, and together we are going to have fun and create change from the inside out. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back, my friends. We are here for another episode of Internally Guided Life, and we are going to be exploring the topic of becoming our authentic selves and really what it takes to get there, because it's often not as easy as just be yourself. There's a journey involved in really connecting with who that is and deprogramming and deconditioning and connecting with that deep inner self. So we're going to talk to our guest today and figure out what it takes to really get beneath the noise and unveil that true authenticity. So I hope that you'll take this episode as an invitation into some presence, into some embodiment, and some bravery to really lean into who you really are, who you're really called to be in this world, in this life. And to guide us through this conversation is Cat Mansfield. She is a yoga and meditation teacher, a wellness consultant, head of content at SoulPod, a platform devoted to awakening inner wisdom through conscious community and guided practice. And her teachings are rooted in the sacred valley of Peru and blend intuitive movement, breathwork, and ancient wisdom, but built for the modern soul. So if that doesn't intrigue you, I don't know what will. But she's not just a guide, she also really lives this work. And I'm really excited to see where she will guide us today. So if you've been feeling disconnected from yourself, from your body, from your sense of truth or purpose, this episode's for you. We're gonna go there. So with that, welcome, Kat. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Wow, hi, thank you. Well, thank you for that warm intro. I'm excited to be here.
Is there anything you would add regarding who you are and what you're all about in this world?
I think you nailed it. I think you summed it up and tied it up with a bow perfectly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I always love to start with your story, and that can be however you feel called to tell it in this moment. It could be the long, windy version or the elevator version, and then we can kind of dig in as we see fit. But tell us a little bit about how you got here. What's your story of becoming looked like?
Yeah. Well, I love this question. It's also one that I'm like, right, do I want to take an hour or do I want to,
Yeah,
3 sentences?
it's always the
So
challenge.
yeah, I'll try and find somewhere in the middle. It feels like the main through thread of my becoming has really been exactly what we're talking about, which is coming home to my most authentic self and to paint a better picture of that story arc as we all do when we come into these bodies, into this incarnation. I was extremely connected to that self as a young girl, as all of us are as children. And I feel extremely lucky in that I stayed very connected to that sense of self for a very long time, like up until um, late teenage years. And I look back it's a bunch of different variables that contributed to that, but I feel so grateful that I was able to maintain that connection to that sense of playfulness and that innocence and that um, unapologetic sense of knowing who I am. And then somewhere along, late teens, around post high school, moving into college, and all the while, I also want to share that although I felt connected to that, I still was struggling with. I struggled with eating disorders, and what came through in hindsight is like a sense of worthiness, a sense of embodiment, taking up space. Like I still struggled with all of that while still remaining very tethered to my essence. And then as I got into my early 20s, went off to college, I really lost myself and eating disorders, my leaning into numbing at the time was, college partying and doing anything to really belong. So it looked like a lot of self-abandoning, knowing what I truly wanted to do or wanted to say and doing the opposite, doing whatever I felt the other person or this group wanted from me. I became a really great chameleon. On the outside, it looked like I was super happy. I was in this sorority. All the pictures were, at the time was Facebook, dating us a little bit, but there were Facebook pictures up every weekend of us doing fun. On the outside, it looked like I was thriving, and on the inside, I'd never been more farther away from self, farther away from that essence that not even that long prior I felt so connected to.
Mm.
And around that stayed in that container, that what feels like a container of extreme lostness. I don't know if that's a word, but wandering, very much untethered from self. I stayed in that container for most of my early 20s, about 19 to I guess 24, 25. And I was working corporate. I decided I at least had the awareness at the time. I wasn't practicing. I didn't have any meditation practice or spiritual practice even. But I always felt super connected to something greater that also is a through thread through my entire life. And so I had the wherewithal around in my early 20s to zoom out and be like, if I don't change something, if I don't drastically change my environment, and that includes where I'm living, what I'm doing for work, the people I'm around, if I don't drastically change all of the variables that make up my sense of self at the moment, like it's not sustainable because not only am I unhappy, I'm like harming, not legitimately, but like spiritually harming myself. Like I was unwell,
Yeah.
And so I had the wherewithal at that time to I essentially quit my job, moved across the world. I moved to Australia by myself and was like, I need to find myself. It was kind of like an eat, pray, love. Like I'm leaving and I'm going and I'm not coming back until I have some sense of clarity and understanding as to like who I am, what I'm doing here. And that really opened up the next chapter of my life of exactly that, like coming back home to self. And so it started as this solo exploration, which on the surface, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just legitimately like wandering around Sydney, like I worked at a hotel, just trying to get, again, some sense of self and like, what do I like? What do I not like? Who am
Mm.
I? And that led me on an adventure for the next, what am I now? 30. I'm 30 now. So the next 6 years of just really coming home to self. I lived in Australia and then over in New Zealand and then COVID hit. It was a whole whirlwind, but essentially the latter part of the story is all about this sense of adventure coming to life within me that all was meant to, and in hindsight, took me places that were super unaligned, and it all was exactly how it was meant to be, so that I would have this, what brought me to a rock bottom and completely metaphorically like fall to my knees and actually quite literally like fall to my knees and and ask for something, ask for some sort of guidance. And that's when I found meditation. That's when I found yoga,
Mm,
all about the same time as COVID happened, when I was also in this rock bottom of my life. And everything that I had been attached to, all of these identities, the traveler, the adventurer, all the things that created this character of Cat, I like to call it, fell away, just started to dissolve. And so I was left with this very alarming mirror of, yes, I'd done all this travel and I'd come to know this version of me, and I was still very much attached to a lot of those identities. And so now I was coming
mm,
face to face with, who am I without all of these things, without the travel, without the titles, without the praise of, this adventuring person. Who am I with all of that, without all of that? And the next 4 years or so have been all about coming home to self, this unwavering getting to know of my essence again. It's like it feels like it's a full circle back to where I was in childhood into, the beginning part of the story. It's this beautiful circle back home to me, to Kat, and to the essence of that, not the character of Kat, not all of the things that we
mm,
attach to that I I decide make me Kat, all the things beyond that, zoomed out of that, the soul essence of me coming home to that. And that has been the most beautiful part of the story. The other parts I love, I visit those versions of me often, the version of me in high school, the version of me in college who was so far away from home, the version of me who traveled, and all the different relationships and loves and jobs and invent, like I visit those versions of me often. But this present day version of me feels the most real, the most grounded, the most connected to truth. And that's been just such a beautiful and healing journey. And so maybe we can dive a little bit more into, what that all means, but that feels like kind of the overarching storyline.
yeah. Wow. What a beautiful and winding story, as all of
Totally
our
windy.
stories
Yeah.
are. That's
Yeah.
why I love to ask this question. It's such a great entryway into like, how do we end up where we're at? There's always an interesting story there, and I appreciate your vulnerability and also just kind of painting out the timeline for us. I think knowing that you had this deep connection up until a certain point and then lost it. I think we have those stories, but the timeline can vary a little. And you said you were
Hmm.
so grateful for like the amount of time you had before you started to lose touch. And I thought that was just a really beautiful reflection too, because when I think back on my own journey, I think I was like 13, 14,
Yeah.
maybe even a little younger when I started to like feel like I was no longer me.
Mm.
So I love that you had some of those formative years like really with yourself, even
Mhm.
though there was the presence of those other things that happen as we're
Mhm.
teenagers and trying to live in this culture and all
Totally.
of the things society like puts into us subconsciously,
Programs.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you said so around COVID was when you found yoga, meditation, and started that part of the journey, even though you had
Hmm.
already, started your adventuring life and doing some of these other things. Tell me a little bit more about what that looked like coming into meditation and yoga. That was one of my pathways into like this work too. So I'm curious what your experience was with that.
Yeah. So it's so fun to think about it's like a love story, you think about how you first met and I'm like, how did I first meet meditation, and
Yes, I love
it's
that.
yeah, and it's so sweet because it was a bunch of synchronicities. Had seen I was on Instagram. This is like the exact moment of inception. I remember this clearly. I was on Instagram and I was passed through some influencer story, and she had posted this book by Joe Dispenza called Becoming Supernatural. And people are posting books all the time, and I'm actually not. I mean, I am now, but at the time I wasn't much of a reader. So there was no real reason why this one book and this random influencer posting it like would have hooked me in and like played some sort of chord within me. There's no real reason, but it did. And so aside from that, it was meant to, that's the reason, but but it did. And so I just knew in that moment, I was like, I have to read this book. And so ordered the book, read it, and it immediately, like in real time, changed my life and I think because my mind has a proclivity to be much more like analytical, math and science-y, and so when it came to meditation and reading all of the science and the quantitative data there is to fortify what we know to be happening in meditation, it something clicked in me where I'm like, okay, this is not only like a spiritual tool, this is a physical tool that is proven with quantitative data as to how I can transform my brain. Like it's up to me. There was this in real time, just like harmonizing and taking responsibility
Mm.
of like it's up to me whether I stay where I am, which is feeling small, feeling so scared. I used to have so much anxiety growing up, like especially in that middle chapter of the story, so much anxiety, social anxiety, and again, still struggling with those eating disorders and that sense of self and worthiness and like worthiness was a word that I couldn't even, define, let alone tell you how that felt in my body, let alone like say that that's something that I am, that I simply am. And so this being able to reorient around a lot of these spiritual practices and include that other part of me, like that part of my brain that was a little bit more skeptical, it just opened the door for me. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna try. And um, it started as guided meditations through more like spoken word, and I would just lay in bed and listen to them in my AirPods and fell in love with how they started to make me feel, which was just a moment of peace. And then as I'm reading this book, pairing that knowledge with what I'm starting to feel and encounter, it it quickly snowballed into a like legitimate addiction where my body craved this peace. And probably because I'd at that point gone like, a decade in such a noisy mind and such a loud mind, so much anxiety, so much self-doubt, so much self-loathing that to finally have these little pockets of connection to peace and truth, it it really quickly became an addiction to the point. And again, we were COVID, so I couldn't do much. I was
Yeah.
like, either I spent a lot of that time at home and I spent a lot of that time in my apartment at the time I was living in Toronto by myself in my room. And so I was like, okay, well, can't do anything. So I filled a lot of that time with meditation and rolled
Mm.
out my yoga mat in my little room and just stretched and moved and got in touch with what it feels like to be in my body and would spend anywhere from 5 to an hour and a half meditating at different times of that journey. And it just quickly became everything I could, everything I wanted to do
Mm.
was to connect me back into that space, which is, consciousness, which is oneness, which is truth, which is infinite potential, the quantum, like however you want to tag it, it's all the same. It's available to us, in our presence and our breath. And so that's all in hindsight, it's like a honeymoon phase with like a lover where you're just obsessed. And
Yes.
you're just like, it's all I want to do is eat, breathe, and you know, inhabit them. And that's how I felt about meditation and yoga at the time. It was all I was feeling called to. And that's how not only did I know that that's why, but I started so quickly to see the transformation take place in me. I was able to move that from that space of openness and peace on my cushion and on my mat out into other parts of the day. And I would be like, okay, all of a sudden I'm grounded, I'm all of a sudden
Mm.
I'm not anxious. Like, what is this? And was just enamored by how much. more of my time I was occupying in this space of peace.
Mm.
And from there, it was fairly clear. I'm like, I can't, not only can I not do anything else, but it's my passion to share this because of the transformation I experienced so quickly, but also just such drastic transformation, like 180-degree difference. And the through thread, I look back, it's like it's still me, right? It's not like I'm no longer Cat, but it's just now I'm actually connected to my essence versus the having to maintain this performative, again, character of Cat. And there's just so much more peace, so much more efficient to exist like that, you know? So your body's not working overtime, your mind's not working overtime to maintain this version of you that you've constructed and having to maintain that for everyone in your life, it's exhausting.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's so many pieces of that. I'm like, which thread do I want to pull on? But even that last piece that you just shared about the energy tax of trying to
Mm.
like manage the identity and the performance, I think is so powerful. I work in the burnout space a lot. We were talking a little
Hmm.
bit before the show,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that comes up a lot there is the energy expenditure of trying to be seen as
Oh,
whatever,
totally.
fill in the blank. We have all of these things that we think we need to be seen as, and it's takes so much effort to try to hold that identity or persona or mask out for
Hmm.
the world. And sometimes it's a shifting game of multiple identities that we're trying
Totally.
balance and
Yeah.
manage, and it's impossible, and it's like you said, it's exhausting. And I love your love story with meditation, and I can like hear it in your voice when you're sharing about it. And like what came up for me as I was listening was both like a coming home to and like a real empowering self-authoring that was maybe coming
Mm.
alive in you during that. Does that resonate?
Yeah, totally. It's like I was saying in that moment of like radical responsibility of like I am the creator of my life. And so as soon as I decide for that to be true and really step into that seat as the creator, it automatically, it you can't be in both. You can't be in victim and creator at the same time. And a lot of us, myself included, was existing in that victimhood mentality. Things are happening to me. Um, I'll never, whether it be from the lens of abundance, from the lens of relationship, from the lens of whatever, career, like anything that you want to, however you want to look at it. If you're looking through the lens of victimhood, it's going to be, it's going to like light coming through glass into a spectrum. It's going to apply to every part of your life. And so you can't be in both at the same time. When that's one of the gifts of meditation in these practices is that you start to bring awareness to those moments where you fall back into victimhood or where you fall out of your seat as the creator, out of your power, is what that is. And you start to notice in real time when that happens. And instead of being there in shame or, falling further into that victimhood spiral, you just simply notice and are like, this isn't true. It's as easy as noticing and like shifting the gear back. And then you just shift it back into the creator mode, into the empowered mode, and you get to choose. That's so much of what meditation gives you is choice and that real time awareness of when you've wavered or when you're going off track out of alignment and come back into choice and truth and what frequency do I want to occupy in any given moment? It is my choice, and that's not to bypass emotions or grief or anything that's difficult. And at any given point, we get to choose how we author our lives, as you said. That's a beautiful way to say it. And I also wanted to double click on something you said or just kind of clarify. It's like it's the journey of, right, of being in this space of authenticity. It's not, and like the longer you're on this journey, the easier it is to occupy that space more of the time. And I still notice when I'm in groups of friends, or if I'm in a new space or I just started a different job. And when I first entered spaces with my new coworkers and noticing in my body, like, where is that inclination to be performative? Where's the inclination to wear the mask? It still comes up. It's a part of our like survival instincts, like what is going to make me belong the most in this group? What do I have to say so that I'm not, an outcast in this tribe? It's in our like DNA to suss a room out and figure out how you best fit and belong. And we get to come online in that time, tune into our body and choose that I'm safe here. I'm safe to not perform. I'm safe to simply exist. I'm safe to be quiet if I need to be, if I want to be quiet, if that's what feels the most true for me. So I wanted to just expectation set or
Mm.
remain realistic about that for people, and that it's not something that disappears. It's something that becomes a lot more easy to notice and a lot more easy to switch out of. It's a lot more graceful to switch out of and remain grounded. But I think it's something we all will always, you know, be on the journey of becoming with that one.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you pulled that thread because, yeah, it's so important, I think, to be gentle with ourselves on these journeys and not become frustrated when we notice that slip because the noticing is so powerful. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you noticed that you started to do that thing again, or you started to perform, and for me, I've always found it helpful to be like a little comical with my observations of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, how silly, doing that thing again. We don't actually
Totally.
have to do that anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Like find some humor in it. Like it's our humanness. We've been born into these human lives, these human minds, and this human society, and we don't get to escape that because we are on this journey. But you can become, like you said, aware, and your noticing potential becomes higher and the moments of alignment become greater in number and
Mm-hmm.
in length of time that you get to spend there and all of
Totally.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds very much like the meditation and the yoga journey is what carried you along this path to being and becoming your authentic self and still being on this journey. And I love that for all of us that we get to never
Yeah.
stop this journey, right?
Totally. Never ends.
Right? This is a forever adventure we're on.
Yeah.
But I guess let's dig into what authenticity means to you and maybe get a
Mhm.
little more granular with it. So when you're thinking about this or when we're talking about it, if people are still feeling maybe a little lost or a little unconnected from who they really are. Like sometimes that can feel like a far gap to bridge when you've spent so much of your time trying to be what other people want you to be. What
Hmm.
does it really look like and feel like to be authentic? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question because I do think authenticity is such a buzzword, and it's to when you just hear it, we think we know what it means without really diving into your specific understanding of it. And so, as I say that and think out loud here with you, for me, it's really an individual understanding of that word, right? Like I invite kind of anybody who's listening to go inward and ask yourself, like, who am I? Who is Kat? Who is Kayla? And just start with asking and listening. And on my journey, the way that I have oriented around that is when I get still and I go into meditation, close my eyes, or just take a few deep breaths and come back to me, there's a certain essence that is me, and there's a certain essence that is you. There's a certain essence that is all of us. And it it's like snowflakes. Like there's not one that is the same between all of us. And we could meet somebody who reminds us of another person, but you'll never meet somebody who's the exact same. And so there's your specific essence, and that is your soul's blueprint. Like your soul has a specific blueprint and it's unlike anybody else's. And then that blueprint has a specific essence. And you can play with that and that can sit in your body in so many different ways, like a color or a feeling or a specific flower that comes through. There are like so many ways that you can close your eyes and tune into like who I am, what is my essence, and what is the feeling of it. And then getting really becoming so familiar with it, like so that when you're, and this is, I guess, more so like how I think authenticity plays in the world. It's like so that when you're in a space where you feel that urge to chameleon or put the mask on, or you feel, a little bit uncomfortable in your own skin, anxiety, whatever it is, you are so familiar with that essence that you can take a breath, feel your feet on the ground and call it into you.
Mm.
And when you're, for me, the way I have experienced it is like when you're true, authentic soul's essence expression is living inside of your body, has been called into your body by your own intention, by your own attention and intention, have called upon it. Again, the two can't exist at the same time. Like you can't be connected to self and to your highest self essence, again, all different words, same thing, but can't be connected to that and be anxious and be ungrounded. It's because our essence is so true and so powerful and so a part of something bigger that it like gives me chills when I think about it. It grounds you immediately,
Mhm.
and it's so rooted in truth, which is worthiness, which is deservingness, which is unconditional love, that those those ingredients in instantaneously overpower the anxiety, the fear, the ungroundedness, the untetheredness, the ego, another word for it. But so it's a practice of really becoming familiar with your essence and then being able to call upon that so that in those moments you you can really ground into that feeling, into that, again, however it lives in your body. And then I don't know, just little things are coming through of like, so you're in a space and you've connected to that essence, and then, saying the joke that comes to mind isn't as scary. Or you say it and no one laughs, and it's like, okay, I still think it's funny, or I still wanted to say it. There's none of this, like, there's no consequence to being your authentic self. It's like, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, where you've like been in an environment and then you leave and then you spend the next hour like replaying all the things you said and wondering if so and so interpreted that this way and if that one thing you said was actually, rude, but you didn't mean for it to be rude. And instead of that, it's like when you're in your authentic self, you leave a space and you're like, you might do a little reflection because that's natural. That's also healthy, I think. But you do that reflection and you're like, okay, I feel like I showed up as my most authentic self, even if I accidentally said something that may have come off as rude. Like I know where I was coming from was rooted, centered, grounded, and there's none of that like runaround of and shame and questioning. It's just like that was me. And now on to the next environment, now on to the next moment where I will, bring my most authentic self to there too.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's a loaded question, but that's kind of that's everything that's come up for me.
I love it. I think that's such a beautiful answer. And like as I was listening to you, just thinking of the truth that we can sense in ourselves when we are in that alignment, right?
hmm
And I think we can sense it like in our physical bodies as well as in our minds. Like you mentioned um the noise and the busyness
Mm,
of the mind, and how, like, as you got into meditation, that started to calm, and you could probably really actually be with yourself once some of that dropped
hmm
down. So there's that piece. And then I also think of like when I feel constricted, when I feel tight,
hmm
tense, like that's usually a sign to me of like, what am I trying to do here? Like, what's going
Totally.
on? Like we're not really
Yeah.
with ourselves right now, are we?
Yeah. No, that resonates. It's also a key indicator. And in that, again, it's kind of like a step one to all of this is that awareness, but awareness in the mind, but that comes hand in hand with an awareness of the body, which is also why, for me, meditation and yoga are two that play so beautifully together in my life because that awareness of our body is such a valuable, indicator to tell you, an alarm system to tell you when like, okay, your nervous system's not regulated here, you're feeling like you need to perform, you're feeling amped. And like even recently, I feel like in the last 6 months or so, I was just adamant. I'm like in every single social setting, I'm going to be so in my body and notice like when I feel exactly what you're saying, that constriction or that like my heart's beating quickly and I need to perform I used to just kind of get a little bit more amped and like, oh, I said something funny and da 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 da, and I said something else here and did everyone hear me? And being so in my body of like, and then just noticing and without the shame, but just in the real time being like, oh, okay, you're feeling the need to make a joke or, make sure, ask a question or fill the silent, like you're feeling that need. Okay. And being so in my body that I can notice it, at that moment. But I think that's a big, um, obstacle for a lot of people is to be fully in their body.
Yeah, let's go down that path a little bit
Yeah.
because so for me, I did, when I first came into this work, I mentioned, yoga and meditation, and the yoga was what really like cracked me open. And I think a big part of that was because I also struggled with eating disorders and body image stuff and just feeling so much disdain for my body in my
Mm-hmm.
early years that I had just disconnected from it almost entirely. Like I
Mm,
talking about noticing when I'm, like if I'm feeling
totally.
constricted, I would have never noticed that. I felt like I was a floating like thing
Yeah.
outside of my body,
Same.
essentially,
Yeah.
right? So when I started to do yoga, I remember it was probably a couple of months of my solo yoga practice just being crying. Um,
Mm,
because I was actually feeling my body. I was actually in touch with my body, and there was so much like built up, stored up there that
mm-hmm.
had been so neglected and so unloved for so long. And that, that
Mm-hmm.
was such a portal. But I think you're right. It's hard for people to drop back into our bodies when we're so taught to like live up here, and that occupies all
Totally.
of our energy. So being someone who's trained in this and guides people through this connection to the body, let's go down that path. How do we start to develop that body awareness and really notice?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that also resonates for me. I feel like I spent the majority of my life just unaware of what's happening from like neck down.
Yeah.
And even sometimes still, I think if you work a 9 to 5 job or any job really where you are using your brain, so all the jobs, then I think there's a tendency to like close the computer, be done with the day, but then just keep going in our head, just keep going in our, neck up. And then we go back into the home, just in our neck up. And so I think like little practices, even I still have to, weave into my day of one hand on my belly, one hand on my heart, starting to really breathe into those spaces and feeling like my belly and my chest expand into my palms and then fall towards my spine. And 10 breaths, just like bringing your awareness to the sensations in your low belly and starting super small, I think is the key because for a lot of us, if we haven't done any practices like this, or if, where depending where you are in your journey, if you've spent the majority of your life neck up. And then you just all of a sudden start to bring all of your awareness down into your, especially for a lot of women, down into your womb space, into, pelvic, womb, lower energy centers can be really disorienting, borderline like traumatic.
Yeah.
So starting really small and very tenderly with yourself of I'm going to give myself, 2 minutes of breathing where I do place all of my attention, all of my intention into tuning into the sensation of this space of my body, my womb, my lowest energy center, kind of base of the spine, perineal area, or even starting in your heart space. That's like a really beautiful place to start, and tuning into your heartbeat, tuning into breath again, into your palms, breathing into the belly, and then drawing it up into the heart. And that's it's so simple, but it's a foundational part of starting to feel again
Mm.
and feel into your body, but then extrapolate that out into feeling emotions that have been trapped inside these parts of our body. Similarly, I spent a lot of the that time in that apartment in Toronto where I was meditating and doing yoga a lot, crying as well, crying on my yoga mat, doing hip opener stretches like pigeon. Yeah, and yeah, if you want to unlock some emotions, do some hip openers,
Yeah.
pigeon pose, malasana, yogi squat. You'll just all of a sudden start bawling. But and that's because, like you said, there's so much of our experience and emotion that is stored in our body. And as we start to uncover that, I also want to just name that, yes, it can be overwhelming and difficult to metabolize the um, magnitude of emotions at times. And our body is stored those emotions there and is doing what it needed to do to survive, so that the version of you who 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago didn't have the tools or the ability to metabolize that experience, or that the threshold of that emotion, that pain, that grief, that betrayal, whatever it was, didn't have the tools to metabolize that. Instead of, still flushing it through your system, debilitating you, essentially, it stored it so that you can keep going, so that you could keep going into the next day, so that you could keep showing up at your job, surviving, doing the things that you need to do to survive. And so it's this really beautiful dance of in the awakening process and in the healing process of uncovering these emotions, tuning into the sensations of your body, and all the while having this really developing more so this really beautiful relationship with that process that our body's done to keep us safe,
Mm.
and I think that's a huge part of the healing journey in general, is starting to develop that relationship with your body, and seeing it, orienting around it as an ally, as this vessel that is housing your soul. And something that I noticed as I was on this journey is like, the more that I developed that relationship with my body, the more difficult it was to treat my body poorly, because I started to, and it's such a different lens. Like earlier in my journey, I would, restrict eating and only eat healthy things from this place of fear, from this place of I need to manipulate and change my body and run it into the ground and work out all the time under the guise of I'm being healthy.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's I have a really hard time eating anything processed, or you know not moving my body for a for long periods of time, but from this place of it is the most beautiful part of my soul. It's what's taking me through this life, it's
Mm.
it's housing me. It's this my best friend and ally and lover, I can't it pains me to, you know treat it poorly. Totally different lenses. Like one's fear and constriction and manipulation, and one is love and compassion and a an alliance. And so
Mm,
I think that those are all just like different parts of that journey of coming into feeling.
mm. I love so many things about what you just said, but especially the piece of, I think, like coming into this loving relationship with our bodies and to do it gently, kindly, slowly. And I think, especially as women, you mentioned trauma briefly,
Mm-hmm.
the way that we often, like some of that disconnection and dissociation, some of it is maybe self-imposed trauma, but also other imposed
Mm-hmm.
trauma, very real physical threat or danger or experience that, it was a safety and protective thing that we had to come out of contact with to,
Yeah.
like you said, continue showing up. And so then as you start to touch those really tender places, like to be slow and gentle and listen to yourself and come into that loving contact and know that there's going to be some like ups and downs on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's coming up for me is like tra trauma informed as well is kind of this sense of like the end goal is developing a sense of unwavering safety in your body so that you have the tools and the capacity to hold any emotion that is released within your body, any trauma that or memory that's been stored within you, that you have the capacity through your breath to remain in your body, to feel it and alchemize it and metabolize it. Like that is the goal of these practices and this, one of the many goals, I guess, but they're all, of healing is to really be in that sense of no matter what happens, like I am so safe in my body. I'm safe to feel anything to any magnitude. And as you're starting this or on this journey, no matter where you are, but having that discernment, as we're talking about, like if there's been trauma or if an emotion comes up that's so big and feels so, too big for you to hold, having that discernment of like, I don't need to stay here. I can actually pull myself out and come back down, drop back in to this feeling, to this memory at another date when I'm more resourced, when I feel like I have, more tools available, instead of bulldozing past that and being like, I'm gonna feel it all right now. I can do it. I'm safe. It is a dance of like of titrating. Is that the word where you take a little and then you take some more and then you take and eventually you do have the capacity to hold any magnitude, but it doesn't start like that. You have to open the aperture.
Yeah. I think this kind of movement into feeling safe in our bodies is connecting us back to the topic of this talk like really well in that I was just thinking, how do I know I'm in authenticity? And a lot of that
Mm,
is in safety. Like when I'm feeling fully myself, fully safe in the moment in my body, like that is my authentic self, like the me that arises in those moments. And so
hmm.
these practices, the meditation and the yoga, it's like helping us, giving us the tools to cultivate that sense of safety when either our own minds or the environments we've been in or the society we're in, all of these things have given us reasons maybe not to feel safe, but then we
Hmm.
get to kind of reclaim what determines our safety and how we can cultivate that for ourselves.
Totally. Yeah, we do. And it becomes something that doesn't have anything to do with anything external, you know? And I think that's something I fall into still of like, I won't be okay unless XYZ are maintained outside of me, unless my environment looks like this, unless I have this to eat, unless da da da, I won't be okay. Versus it's all actually internal. Like my ability to be peaceful, my ability to feel safe, my ability to come back to that sense is always in you. It has nothing to do with anything external.
Yeah, yeah, we're always available to ourselves, but it's sometimes hard to find it. It takes some practice, and I
Hmm.
think the relationship thing, right? Of like we kind of have to rebuild our trust with ourselves through these practices and like show up for ourselves again and again and again. Keep coming.
Yeah, yeah. And the fun part is like when you decide, like, okay, I'm going to go on this journey. When you decide to embark, the universe is going to be like, hell yeah. And then it's going to give you lots of opportunities to show up as your most authentic self. And that I think dating is honestly one of the best realms to use as this like tool for calibration of like where am I on this journey?
Mm.
How easy is it for me to show up in this container and remain tethered to me? I think dating is easily one of the most just clear mirrors as to where we are in this journey of being authentic because at least on my journey, I feel like when I was dating, I that's where I most often would self-abandon and do it in a way that was so nuanced to the point where my ego really convinced me that it wasn't self-abandon. No, that's actually what I want. No, that's I do agree with that statement. Like would be
Hmm.
so sneaky in convincing me and rationalizing that all the ways that I was self-abandoning what I wasn't. But yeah, so I think that's just it's good to know as you are on this journey of like keeping your eye open because every interaction is an opportunity, but there are going to be bigger opportunities that the universe presents you with as to how you can declare like, okay, no, this is I know who I am. I'm showing up. I'm unwavering in my knowing. And despite the consequences, despite whether the other person likes me or agrees with me or thinks I'm whatever, like despite any of that, I'm showing up as me. And so then it gets fun. And then it's so much more like playful because it's this constant communication with the universe of like, I'm ready. I'm devoted to this journey. I'm devoted to this becoming, to this coming home. And then the universe is like, great. And then gives you, an opportunity. And then you get to show up.
Yeah, I love that. And it brings that authenticity into relationship because I think, it feels a lot safer and easier to connect with who we are when we're on our own, on our mat, in our meditation, and then we come into relationship with others, whether that's through dating, romantic relationships, friendships,
Hmm.
family relationships with people at work. Like
Yeah,
once you start to interface with others, that's when we get really like tested. We get to see how committed we really are and recognize what happens when we slip out of that authenticity and why and what need were we trying to meet through that and how can we be more aligned next
totally.
time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful like line of self-inquiry that happens because you know if you do fall out of authenticity, which we all do, and it's part of the journey, as we said, then like you said, you just get to gently reflect and check if there's any shame there. Gently reflect, tune in with your inner child and ask, like you said, exactly why? Like, what was I afraid of? What was I needing to get met? Like, what part of me was scared to show up fully? And really, like, get down on a knee with your inner child and ask and talk and hold them. And then you get to move on to the next opportunity. You get to forgive the moment of self the moment in time where you self-abandon that version of self that needed something from this interface and move on to the next and vow to show up even more wholly. I think it all comes back to inner child stuff too, as I'm thinking about it. It's like that devotion to be your most authentic self it's a vow to your inner child, It's like I have a picture of young version of me, little girl, up in my bathroom, like on the mirror. And I always look at that and I'm just like I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, like all of us are so connected to our sense of self, to that essence that I've spoken about when we're kids. And then it's programmed out of us. We're programmed to chameleon and look this certain, be this certain way, all the stuff. But it's this whole journey is a vow to that inner child of like, I will be my most authentic self for you so
Mm.
that you can shine through me. Because otherwise, we're saying that essence, we're communicating that essence is not perfect. But you would never look at a child and be like, oh, you should be less, or you should be different, or that you shouldn't really make that joke. You would never. You look at every child and you're like, absolutely perfection. So
Yeah.
it's this really beautiful harmonizing of timelines of like, I am vowing and devoted to this becoming, to this embodiment of my authenticity so that my inner child can live through me, like for her, for
Mm.
them.
Yeah. Yeah, that like deep self-honoring of who
Hmm.
the part of us that's always been there, and yeah, bringing them with us, not like locking them away somewhere and telling them that they don't belong here, but like really pulling them through. I think you said letting them shine through.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful way to think of it and to carry that part of us always,
yeah,
tenderly and with love.
totally. It's being like, you take the stage. Like I'm I'm a vessel for that essence to move through me. And so yeah, for me, inner child, like that devotion and vow to my inner child is feels really powerful for me and feels like and very like because it's not for anybody else then. It's not like I'm going to get to my most authentic self so that I meet my husband or so that I attract the job. It's like I'm getting to my most authentic self so that I give this little girl who is me, but give this little girl the stage she deserves, the exactly the space to shine.
Mm. Yeah, and it's so I think it's so fun and playful when we allow like that part of us to really be in the center stage, and like we I can feel those moments when that inner child is like most shining, because you feel like you're almost back there again in like the childlike wonder and the playfulness and the laughter and the like dancing and singing, and not like before you learned how to care what other people might think, what something was gonna.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like this liberation.
Total liberation. Yeah, and it doesn't matter like how old you are, we have that connection embedded and ingrained. It's like the most natural through line of our becoming is through all of the versions of self. But and we've probably all felt it, whether it be like most recently I went to a festival with my fiance and we I was dancing to one of my favorite bands. This one of an anthem came on, one of their songs, Anthem. And I just felt it, this moment of liberation where everything was all of the inhibitions, all of the like who's around me, who's watching me just falls away. And it's this liberation, such a beautiful word. It's liberated, like it feels like a star that's like bursting,
Mm,
just like explosion of presence and healing and aliveness that takes
mm.
place. And we have access to that at any time and at any age.
Yeah,
Yeah.
aliveness. That's definitely, I think, the word that's coming through. And this whole conversation has been really infused with that.
Mm.
I am so grateful for you and your presence and your perspective and your journey, and kind of inviting me and the listeners in to this world. I'm going to ask you one more question before
Yeah.
we wrap up, and that is, if you had the opportunity to share a message that you felt like people who maybe are not feeling fully connected with this essence, this authenticity yet, there's a disconnect, there's still some pain, there's still some anxiety. If you could whisper a message into their heart, what would you tell them? What would you leave them with?
Mm. Yeah, this is a message that came through to me early in my journey, and it just has been a mantra and the muse for one of my tattoos as well. But it's remember the truth.
Mm,
Remember the truth of who you are, of your perfection, of your purity, of your magnificence, of your divinity. Like, remember the truth. It's a remembering is this whole journey. It's in us, it's who we are, and it's simply a remembering. It's all we have to do.
mm. I love that so much. That's beautiful. That's a perfect place to, I think, wrap up our conversation. Although I feel like I could talk to you for hours and it wouldn't feel like enough. It's
Yeah,
can't believe the
yeah,
time
it's
has
been
gone
so
by so
fun.
fast. Where can people find you if they want to stay in tune with the work you're doing in the world?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at I am Cat Mansfield. My website is catmansfieldyoga.com. And check us out on SoulPod. There's a lot, these tools are in there, a lot of guided meditations. It's just a platform I'm so passionate about contributing to because it has the potential to change lives and be exactly the tool that we are talking about that I wish I had on my awakening journey and the community that I wish I had on my awakening journey. So check out SoulPod as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kat. This has been such an honor, so beautiful. Thank you to
Yeah.
everyone who's listening. I hope that you check out SoulPod and all of Kat's work and also take that message to heart and do that remembering work. Remember the truth, remember your truth, and take care of yourselves. Until next time. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If this episode spoke to you, please take a moment to follow, rate, and share it with someone who might need it. If you're looking for more tools to help you thrive in your life, or if you're curious about working with me, please visit my website at internallyguidedleadership.com. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Internally Guided Coach. Be gentle with yourself out there, and I'll talk to you next time.